and welcome to this week's edition of Organic Matters, the podcast brought to you by the Irish Organic Association. So we are still on, reseeding, which is an important subject for this time of year, and we're talking to Mary McEvoy, or Dr. Mary McEvoy, who's the Technical Director with Germinal Ireland. Mary, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thanks very much for having me on the podcast, Hannah.
I've seen you in action, so I know that you are a bit of a draw, whether you're a conventional farmer or an organic farmer, in terms of talking about reseeding and what you should be doing. But give us a sense first, what does Germinal actually do?
So Germinal, we're a leading grass and forage seed specialist. We develop sustainable grassland varieties and supply a range of premium agricultural seed to the Irish, UK and also New Zealand seed markets. We were founded in 1825, so we're coming up on our 200-year anniversary, and we're a family-owned company. So it's currently in the sixth generation of the family. So we have a proud history, which I suppose is built on the strength of our people. We work, I suppose, within the industry. We're a wholesale company, but we work closely with, merchants, co-ops, Teagasc and other research partners to share grassland knowledge. And we're also very committed to a responsible future for agriculture. So, we believe we have a very strong product in terms of Irish agriculture, but we need to maintain the sustainability of that into the future. And so through our grass and clover breeding programs, we're looking at climate smart forages. So, what we can deliver in and above what we're already getting from our grasses and clovers in order to, make sure we're being environmentally smart, as well as delivering products which are going to be sustainable in an economic or financial sense for the farmer.
And what are those products? Is it looking more at clover? Is it looking more at kind of multi-species swords? What are those products that are going to help farmers?
I suppose there's a broad range of what we're looking at, Hannah. Obviously, grass is core to our business, and we're doing a lot of work in terms of developing our grasses. And if we talk about grass varieties and the key traits that are important from a farmer's perspective, it's going to be seasonality of dry matter production, it's going to be quality, it's going to be persistency of those grasses, and it's going to be performance under either a grazing or silage scenario. But I suppose in addition to that, we're also looking at what we can add or additional benefits we can bring to our grasses, and that might be in the form of developing a different root structure. So perennial ryegrasses by their nature are quite shallow in terms of their root structure, and we're looking at different, incorporating different species through our breeding program, to improve the rooting structure. So if we can have deeper rooting plants, they're obviously going to be more tolerant of drought conditions or dry spells when they hit. But they also have the benefit in terms of if we get deluges of rain, if we have better root structure, you're going to be water's going to get off the surface that little bit easier, so it has potential to reduce things like flood risk. So that's one area we're looking at. We're doing a lot of work on clovers as well. We have developed, and I suppose we've been the first breeder who have successfully crossed a Caucasian with a white clover, and we've brought a double root clover, as we call it, to the market. So that variety is currently on the market and available at the moment.
So that's quite exciting stuff for people that are into kind of, growing grass or growing clover. I mean, that's quite important. And you touched upon these deeper rooting kind of varieties as well, and that's incredibly important in relation to, drought resistance going into the future. We know that climate issues are going to raise their heads even more. So these are all kind of important things. So what are you hoping that this new hybrid, if you like, what are you hoping that will actually do or actually achieve?
Well, look, I mean, I suppose if you talk about in terms of the grasses, I mean, drought resilience is definitely becoming more of an issue. I don't think, 10 or 15 years ago, I thought that we'd be doing a huge amount of talking about the importance of drought resilience in grass-based products in Ireland. But, we have seen for the last 5 years, some parts of the country, if not most parts of the country, have had some level of a drought every year for the last 5 years. So it is definitely becoming more of an issue. So it's about, I suppose, ensuring that, building more resilient crops that can tolerate those hot spells that are slower to go into drought, that maintain quality better, and that deliver from an animal performance perspective as well. So even if in years where we're not in drought, that those still maintain good quality and we get good animal performance, be that meat or milk production off them right throughout the year. In terms of the clover, the double root clover that I spoke about there, everlasting, that has both rhizomes and your typical stolons. So we're all familiar with the stolons which white clover has. That also has rhizomes. which is bring increased drought tolerance to it, and we've seen that in trials, as well as cold tolerance. So it's surviving much colder temperatures than our traditional white clovers would. So, you know, as the climate changes, I suppose we're trying to ensure that, you know, we're safeguarding, I suppose, our own business, but also obviously farmers into the future, that as the climate becomes more challenging, that they have the tools and means to produce homegrown forage in a more challenged environment.
I guess it's kind of a nosy question in a way, but if you were advising a farmer, say that it wants to reseed in the sunny southeast, would you advise them differently to a farmer that might be in a wetter county like Galway? I mean, I presume the answer is yes, but I'm just wondering how extremely different the advice would be for those two farmers.
So look, yeah, it depends. I suppose, yeah, when you're talking to a farmer, you're always trying to get an understanding for, you know, the conditions that they're farming in, their soil type, because, you know, some parts of Wexford have challenging soil types as well. It's not all quite the sunny southeast, or it might be all the sunny southeast, but I suppose you've huge variations in terms of the soil profile at different parts of the county. So you're trying to get a handle on the challenges those farmers face, and, you know, what their problems are, and if they're faced with, you know, if dry weather is their biggest problem and they're burning up in the summer period, well then, yeah, you're going to talk to them about, you know, about more clovers. You're going to talk to them probably about, you know, getting a better balance diploid and tetraploids into the mixture. The diploids are great for, you know, ground cover and bringing density to sward, and, you know, in challenging ground conditions, diploids work really well. But, you know, sometimes in drier conditions, the tetraploids have greater potential to yield or to grow grass. So they can, you know, perform better across the year, maybe on drier ground. And yeah, we're seeing an increased interest in terms of like multi-species, in terms of herbs which have deeper roots, to try bring some drought resilience to those systems. So yeah, we do give different advice for different farms, but you could also talk to one farmer and give different advice for two different fields on that farm, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. And I guess we've heard a lot, there's a multi-million euro, if you like, red clover scheme and multi-species sward scheme being opened up by the government. I presume you're getting a lot of requests and a lot of queries about that and what kind of seeds should be used.
Yeah, look, there's huge interest, I suppose. And look, to be fair to organic farmers, you know, they've always been strong advocates on the importance of red clover, whereas their conventional counterparts are probably only catching up with them in the last year or two in that regard. But yeah, we're getting a lot of queries in terms of from organic farmers in terms of, you know, the seed availability for organics that will be suitable for that scheme, and obviously the herbs and the legumes as well can be difficult to get organically. We do have organic Clyde, which is a perennial ryegrass, and also organic Aberchoice, which is a diploid perennial ryegrass available, and we've had those for the last 2 years. But I suppose outside that, yeah, most farmers are going to have to apply to their governing body and, you know, seek derogation, because I suppose the department scheme has a very specific mixture that they require, and in order to meet that, then, you know, it's difficult to get the clover or the herb portion organically. So you know, you're not going to be hitting the 100% organic to start with, but nor will you hit 70% if we're meeting those schemes. And our organic bodies are obviously going to give derogation, so farmers can meet the scheme requirements and also get the benefit from that €300 per hectare, which the department have said they will provide to assist in the establishment of some of those wards.
Yeah, and I mean €300 per hectare. I mean, that's a very handsome payment, and like we've covered it before on it previously on podcasts, that derogations are being granted, but just to make sure the farmers do apply for the derogation if they're organic and if they're needed. I'm reading some of the, I guess, the press release from that scheme that we were discussing there. I mean, it talks obviously about things that people probably know about clover already, and obviously it has a higher protein content, but also it has the ability to fix nitrogen. It's saying you can fix up to 200 kg of nitrogen per hectare. And then something that's interesting as well is that it says red clover, due to its nitrogen fixation ability, produces fodder higher in protein than conventional silage, and combined with its ability to yield over 14-ton dry matter per hectare, will assist farmers in reducing their concentrate feed bill, which is fantastic. But if you're an organic farmer, are you realistically going to be able to grow over 14 tons of dry matter per hectare without artificial fertilizer? Do we have any trials or anything that we can compare that to, Mary?
Yeah, so look, even if we look to the likes of the work that's ongoing down in Solihead Farm, and I know obviously that's not an organic farm, but it is they are growing, you know, in excess of that. Now they have very high K indices on the farm, but they're mainly putting out slurry, they're putting out very little bagged fertilizer and no artificial nitrogen. So you know, obviously for your clovers in general, soil fertility is really important. We do need to be at, you know, standard P and K indexes of 3, and they do like good soil pH. So you're talking about pH probably ideally 6.5 or above for clovers. But you know, we are seeing a lot of farmers who are putting out very little bagged fertilizer, but using slurry to grow, you know, quite substantial crops of red clover silage and getting very good results from it. And the red clover, I suppose, it does work really well in a rotational system. Maybe, you know, red clover, realistically, you're probably only going to get 3 years out of it. Maybe, you know, if it's well managed, you might get a 4th year with slightly lighter cuts off it. But and we do advise that red clover isn't sown in the same field, you know, twice on a continuum. So you kind of do need a 5-year break between red clover sowings as well. So that is important to bear in mind. So works well within a rotational system on a farm.
And I guess in terms, you touched upon some of the points that it needs there in terms of pH and other qualities as well. But is now the time to be thinking of getting that seed into the ground if you're going to do it?
Yeah, look, I suppose this is an ideal time, and it's, you know, it's the 18th of April here today as we talk, Hannah. So, you know, conditions have improved today. It's a nice sunny day outside, which is great to see. And you know, late April into the, you know, early May is an ideal time to sow. Be it multi-species red clover or grass seed, as for that matter, I suppose. We have again seen in recent years that midsummer period getting very, very challenging for getting swards established out on farms. So if we can do them, you know, in late April, early May, there's tends to be moisture. We're getting better, you know, heavier dew at night, and there's a bit more moisture hopefully coming in from above as well. You know, and temperatures are on the way up, so it gives, you know, a really good chance for those swards to get established. During the midsummer period, it is getting very, very difficult to establish reseeds on a lot of farms, because it's simply getting too dry. When the seed is sown, you might get a shower of rain a couple of days later and the seed will germinate. But if it doesn't get rain subsequently, it's not going to survive. So once the seed germinates, it's really crucial that it gets you know, a reasonable amount of rain, so the roots can develop and it can get that root sent down underground to get more moisture down there. So it is getting more challenging to establish swards in the middle of summer. And likewise, the autumn can be quite problematic, especially where you're trying to establish clovers, your legumes, or your herbs. It gets much more difficult as we go into the autumn, because temperatures start to decline and they all need, you know, higher temperatures to give them every chance. So as I say, you know, if you are thinking of reseeding with, you know, multi-species or, you know, red clovers, you know, now's a really good time to do it, or certainly to get prepared to do it over the next couple of weeks.
And I guess if we give ourselves a bit of a scenario where, you know, people will have closed off meadows and be aiming to maybe cut silage in the next couple of weeks, all dependent on weather. But if they've ordered their seed and they're ready to go with their seed, would they oversow on a meadow that they've just cut, or would they be better off ploughing it up and doing a full reseed? You know, is it different for multi-species sward and red clover? What should they do?
Yeah, look, soil seed contact is always important, and you know, sometimes I suppose with the multi-species in particular, maybe we see a better establishment where, you know, there is more soil seed contact and it is ploughed up. But I suppose, you know, I mean, that's kind of very farm specific as well. And I think, you know, each farmer will know their own ground, and you know, some ground just simply, you know, isn't really suited to ploughing. And
oh, Mary, you're giving me a lazy way out. All I want to do is oversow. I do not want to I do not want to plough up ground. But I have a funny feeling. Basically, I've been told, and I'm sure some farmers have heard this as well, white clover is fine for oversowing, but red clover can be a lot more temperamental. Is that true?
yeah, it is true. It is true. And the biggest challenge, I suppose, with the red clover, Hannah, is, you know, if you're, and especially if you're over sowing it into a sward, which is kind of, you know, still growing a relatively good quantity of grass, it's very hard to, clover needs light. So it's very hard to allow light down to the base of the sward without damaging that red clover as it's coming up. So it's just hard to get that balance right. And if we think about red clover silage swards, okay, you know, and the department scheme, there's 4 kilos of red clover in that. And in order for the red clover to fix enough nitrogen to grow enough of a crop for your silage swards, you know, we do need that clover established from day one. When we oversow clover, even into, you know, or stitch in clover, we go at a higher rate in an oversown situation compared to what we do with white clover. Now I'm talking, we go at a higher rate with an oversown situation than we do with a full reseed situation, because again, not every seed you sow is going to get established. And if we don't get that red clover established on day one, it's not going to spread the way white clover does afterwards. So it's much more difficult.
Okay. So I've been good. I've done a full reseed for my red clover, and I'm looking at my field now. What TLC or what maintenance do I need? Bear in mind, I'm an organic farmer. I can't go in with fertilizer or anything like that. Do I test my slurry and make sure that my slurry, I know what's going into it? Do I spread watery slurry on it? When should I go in with watery slurry? You know, all those questions.
Yeah, look, so I think, you know, not near enough of us test our slurry, and I think it's really valuable information to know exactly you know, what the P and K in particular in our slurry is. A lot of the time what we see is ground that's repeatedly being cut for silage. We're depleting our K indices in particular. So, you know, they mightn't read the slurry, and obviously in the slurry, it's only going to be as good as what went into it. So if you're bringing in grass that's low in K, you can't expect your slurry to be high in K. So, you know, by testing your slurry, it gives you really good information in terms of, you know, the true status of your slurry, the true value of your slurry, and allows you to make sure that you're balancing your nutrients appropriately. So yeah, look, I mean, I'm sure you agreed. I think everyone should test their slurry to get the highest possible use or value out of their slurry. In terms of, I suppose, in terms of management, look, putting out some slurry at sowing is going to help, especially getting P and K into the ground there when you are reseeding. And I suppose thereafter, you know, the recommendation would be after each crop has taken off to replace with slurry. So 2,000 to 3,000 gallons of slurry, if that was available, would be really useful on a red clover silage sward in particular, to make sure that you're feeding it enough for the next crop that you're hoping to take off it.
And are you probably just planning on using it for silage, or can you graze it at a certain point? Like, would you graze it at a certain point at all?
Yeah. So look, the red clover definitely, you know, the red clover silage swards definitely, as the name says, I suppose, they suit a 3 to 4 cut silage system better than a frequent grazing system. Red clover grows from a crown, so it's a slightly different growth habit compared to white clover, which spreads by stolons. And I suppose red clover puts down a taproot as well, which helps in terms of drought resilience with the crop. But because it grows from the crown, you know, it is a little bit more susceptible to damage. So if you're grazing it, we do say, you know, don't graze it tight, you know, graze it relatively laxly. Grazing the back end often helps it, insofar as, you know, when maybe, you know, you get into, you know, if you take 3 or 4 cuts off it and it brings you up to September, say, you might get one more light grazing off it in the back end, and that'll allow light down to the base of the sward over the winter, and that light will really help in terms of the persistency of your clover through the winter and into next spring. So light grazing in the back end is no issue. Don't be grazing it when weather conditions challenging. Don't be grazing it very wet weather. You know, you really don't want to damage the crown of that red clover plant, or it will it's very easy to kill it, I suppose.
Okay. And would there be the same kind of, I guess it'd be different then for multi-species swards then? If people have sown multi-species swards, what's the grazing plan for that?
Yeah, so multi-species work very well, I suppose. They suit grazing very well. I think there's huge benefits to be achieved from grazing multi-species. We know they have antihelminthic benefits, so we see reduced worm burdens where animals are grazing multi-species, especially, you know, the chicories bringing that benefit there. I suppose both the red clover, and I didn't say it for red clover, but both red clover and multi-species, they do need a good wilt. So, you know, they're low in terms of their dry matter. So you're probably talking about a 48-hour wilt. So that is important in terms of planning when you're going to cut it, to make sure you get that wilt, or otherwise it'll compromise the preservation. But yeah, the multi-species can be cut for silage if it gets too strong or you've too much grass on the farm. You know, no issue cutting it for silage. Just make sure you give it that 48-hour wilt. But I suppose, yeah, the multi-species, it is ideally suited to grazing. And again, similarly to the red clover, you just need to be a little bit careful in very difficult weather conditions, or especially in the back end when you might be more likely to do a bit of damage. The chicory in particular, I suppose anyone that's familiar with it, the chicory, you know, as the plant matures, it can get this hollow stem.
Mhm.
And you know, if you're grazing that off and wet weather and rain gets in, it can cause the plant to rot. So just be careful again. Don't graze it in very challenging weather. You know, treat it kindly, I suppose, is the word of advice.
Yeah, but definitely tempting, especially if you're an organic farmer and you are trying to avoid using wormers as much as possible. If it does have that resistance, like for chicory, for example.
Yeah, no,
very
absolutely.
tempting.
And I think the red or the multi-species, you know, there's no doubt about it. We've seen really, really positive results coming from UCD and Johnstown Castle on multi-species in terms of animal performance as well. Finishing lambs a lot quicker, finishing, you know, beef animals are performing a lot better off multi-species compared to your standard grass. So, you know, we are seeing a lot of benefits with them, and there's no doubt about that. And I suppose, you know, in terms of helping to reduce the nitrogen use out on farm for conventional farmers, you know, they do have a really strong role to play in that as well.
Yeah.
The legume proportion, to be fair, of your multi-species is going to be really important. It's important that we, you know, achieve that balance, that right balance of legumes in the sward. Because essentially the legume proportion is going to fix the nitrogen. Your herbs and your grasses both have a demand for nitrogen, and if we don't have the right proportion of legumes there, you know, the sward is going to be compromised.
And similar, are you better off doing a full reseed rather than stitching in with the multi-species?
Yeah, to be fair, I suppose I suppose what I would say, I've seen some mixed results in terms of stitching in multi-species. It's worked quite well in some scenarios and it hasn't worked very well in other scenarios. So look, I mean, I suppose a full reseed is probably the safest way of ensuring you're going to get better results.
And Mary, thank you very much for that. And if anyone wants to find out more information about Germinal, their website is www.germinal.ie. But for everyone else, you've been listening to Organic Matters, the podcast brought to you by the Irish Organic Association. And for more information on organics, you can go to their website, which is www.irishorganicassociation.ie. But that is it from us this week. But stay tuned because, of course, we'll be back again next week.